you and Ariane both up on, at least on my screen. I'm not sure if I'm controlling everybody's screen.
I'll just make a little sound check. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, good. Thanks.
You look good. You sound good.
Oh my God.
Hi, everybody. It is 10 o'clock. So we will get started in the interest of time. On your screen in front of you, you have Jurg Eglin. He is the head of delegation for the International Committee of the Red Cross in Ukraine. He's currently located in Kherson, Ukraine. He has been in the region meeting with local and regional authorities, Red Cross partners, emergency services, on top of meeting communities directly affected by both military hostilities and, of course, the flooding. So we apologize that it's not the most professional of settings. He's sitting in his car because it's raining and he's out actually doing work. So thank you, Jurg, for joining us even in this improvised situation. We also have Ariane Bauer. She's ICRC's regional director for Europe and Central Asia. So she has a much larger view of the region and can speak to slightly different issues than Jurg will speak to. Jurg will speak specifically to our operations in Ukraine, and for bigger picture questions, we'll probably turn and ask Ariane to step in. Jurg is going to open with a short statement, including those things that he's seeing on the ground right now. Then Ariane will come in with a short statement, and we'll take any questions you might have after that. I'm going to put both of their names and titles, including spellings, in the chat, so you have those there. Thank you both, Ariane and Jurg, for joining us. Jurg, why don't you go ahead and start, please?
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me here in this session with the media. As Jason, you mentioned, I'm here in Kherson with my team. Also, we are with the Ukrainian Red Cross, the URCS, come to visit here our operations, our response we have been mounting over the last few days here in this region. Yeah. And we realize once again what this catastrophe means for tens of thousands of people here downstream after the dam was blown up some 10 days ago. We are looking basically at two types of situation. Yeah. The one downstreams where we are here, we're about 60 kilometers downstreams from the dam, where we had flooding, inundations, too much water, that with all the difficulties that comes with in terms of devastation, in terms of also risk for disease, flooded neighborhoods, cellars, and also contamination of water sources. Yeah. And then we're also looking at the situation that is upstreams, that is quite far from here. We're talking about hundreds of kilometers upstreams that will have effects that are not that visible as of yet, but there will be massive problems and massive needs in the days and weeks to come. And there it's a matter of not enough water, where the water level has dropped dramatically, affecting communities for the water intake, for the water consumption, but also for farming communities, irrigation, and even industrial kind of installation that will be affected and are affected in the mid and long term. What is also striking is we are here right at the front line. There is shelling going on there since continuous, regular, and not only now the last few days, but this has been going on for the last 15, 16 months since February last year. Yeah. And with this comes, beside, you can see me sitting here with a flak jacket in a protected car. So the risks are real. And what comes in addition to that is the risk of mines. Their mines were along this front line on both sides of the rivers. And these mines now, with this water flow, are kind of washed down or pushed away, and posing a new danger, a new threat to many communities and people along in this region here. Yeah. So what has happened is the Ukrainian Red Cross, they have responded from day one with their volunteers on the ground, helping with evacuation of people, providing first type of assistance, just very basics, and being there as such. We have supporting the URCS for not only now, but we have been working with them for years, helping them to build up their capacities precisely for situations we are facing here now. Yeah. So there's a tight relationship between URCS and us, and that comes to the forth now. In terms of visibility, obviously, now it's the URCS more on the forefront, and we are more on the back, helping and supporting for this first response. Yeah. But what is next is very important. We have been engaged with authorities at the national level, but here also at the local level, to look at who is doing what, how we respond best. And I just come out of a coordination meeting now, where it's hugely important that we not all run helter-skelters and try to do whatever we think is best. It is hugely important in such a complex and big setting to have proper coordination mechanisms in place. Yeah. So that came to the forth once again. Yeah. Concretely, we have been supplying also materials such as water pumps, large-scale pumps, equipment for clean water provisions, storage tanks, jerry cans, and also we are in the process of providing chemicals for the water treatment plants here in Kherson to make sure that the quality of water and people still have access to water in the days to come. But we also have to look forward now, what is next, especially what I said on upstream, what people need most. And there we are now in the process of assessing and planning for the future. And just also to say that we are ready to intervene on both sides of this river. So far we have responded here on the right side, and we have offered our support and help on the other side as well. We have made concrete requests. Yeah. And maybe just to finish about this frontline situation, last night, when I came to the region here, I spoke to one of the leaders from URCS, an emergency response team leader, who told me that they were working on a spot here yesterday, and half an hour after they left with their teams, the place was shelled. Yeah. So this is really a constant danger here, and this is a frontline situation, which makes our neutral and independent humanitarian work even more relevant. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you very much for that, Jurg. And we will move over to Ariane for a short statement from her.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for your interest. I wanted to take the opportunity today of this briefing to give you an update on the issue of prisoners of war, one that you know is very central to the ICRC's work. First, I want to update you that we continue to visit prisoners of war, both in Russia and in Ukraine, and that in concrete terms, we have visited a total of 1,500 prisoners of war on both sides. For the prisoners of war and their families who have been able to share news, the impact is, and we witness that, is immeasurable. Gaining access to all prisoners of war and civilian internees remains at the center of our efforts and an essential priority. Together with Red Cross and Red Cross movement partners, we have also directly delivered more than 2,500 personal messages between POWs and their families. And those messages, delivering messages, means that we collect them from POWs, we share them with their relatives directly, and when possible, we do the same the other way around. And this is actually what we were able to do very recently, as I was told by one of our colleagues in Moscow, when we were able to visit a first day prisoners of war. Our teams collected messages there from the people we saw. The same evening, they were able to share the messages with the prisoners' relatives. And actually, they were able to collect answers at that same time. And as they returned to the place of detention on the next day, they were able to deliver the answer directly to the prisoner of war. This was the first time that we were able to have so many people that we contacted hear about the fate of their sons, fathers, and brothers. Now, a concrete story, it was already quite late actually when our team came out and was able to make one of the last phone calls to one of the families, and they were actually celebrating a boy's birthday. This little boy had not heard anything about his father for the last 9 months, and his birthday wish that his father would get in touch with him was to come true. So now this little boy knows that his father is alive, and this is really a very concrete impact of our work to be able to visit prisoners of war. We believe that this is also how humanity can be preserved, even in situations of conflict. And this is the crucial work that we do to alleviate the suffering of prisoners of war and families on all sides. Anecdotes such as the one I just shared are, of course, the best reward an ICRC staffer can get, and we hope that what it generates for families is also important to them. We, however, know also that much more is needed, and our teams have been relentless in their efforts to obtain access to all prisoners of war and civilian detainees. When our teams are able to visit, in addition to checking on the conditions of detention, we have in some cases been able to bring also material assistance, such as books, clothing, hygiene items, and personal necessities like eyeglasses, in addition to the much longed for news from home. We understand also that our discrete approach can sometimes seem out of sync with the realities of today's information space, but we want to emphasize that while accessing POWs during an active international armed conflict can prove particularly complex, and this mission remains at the core of our work and at the center of our attention. Neutrality and trust remain essential to meet those objectives, and they can't be disassociated one from another. Remaining neutral means that we stick to our principles, the very principles that help us help people who need our support. And remaining neutral shows that we care for the mandate that we were given by states, by the signatories of the Geneva Conventions, and for the possibilities this mandate gives us every day to help people affected in this international armed conflict. Thanks, Jason, back to you.
Thank you for that, Ariane. Thank you both for those opening statements. And yes, we will now take questions. So if you could raise your hand to ask a question, we'll just go one by one. And Imogen, I saw you signaled first, but I would like to start with Laurent because I think that he might have to move on to the Swiss president. So Laurent, could you step in and ask your question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Jason, for that. Thanks for the briefing. I'd like to ask a question to both on the effect of the counter-offensive, which started now. First to Jurg. Yeah, I know with the flooding, the counter-offensive is not necessarily in that area right now, but do you fear that the counter-offensive might have an impact on the support you'll be able to give? And then to Ariane Bauer, do you have any indication that the pace of the visits to the prison of war might be reduced with the counter-offensive? Thank you.
Jurg, let's start with you. Your video is off. If you're able to turn your video back on, please do. But if not, just go ahead and answer. Please.
Okay, just let me speak like that, maybe, because it gives me a bit more freedom here. Yeah, to answer that question, this is not really related from our perspective as humanitarians. Of course, we are monitoring and following closely what's going on the military front. That's relevant for our security, relevant for our positioning. But what we are dealing here concretely in a response to this disaster followed by the dam burst is not really related. Yeah, so there's no, from our perspective, we cannot put the two things together, and there's no direct impact on our for the time being.
Thank you. Ariane, do you have anything to add to that?
I think it's similar to Jurg's answer. Our discussions with all sides on our full access to POWs remains unabated and unchanged, and of course our efforts will continue, and we don't expect any, change or influence out of the current situation.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Imogen, could you go next, please?
Yeah, and you may not want to answer this, but you have received some not very positive comments from President Zelensky. I mean, I'm wondering why you think that is. Does he not understand what you outlined there, Ariane, to do with neutrality and so on, or are you able to communicate this more effectively? Do you think? Could you?
Do you want me to take that one, Jason?
That's, I think, between you and Jurg, you can decide, but whichever you guys prefer.
I mean, perhaps I can start, and then Jurg can delve in. But firstly, I think, the current environment we're in is extremely mediatized, and that's perhaps one of the first challenges that when you enter into contact with authorities to ask them how things are going, well, this is not part of a photo tweet that we put out there, and thus efforts are not necessarily always visible. This is the first point. The second point on neutrality, look, I think we've seen neutrality being under strain and misunderstood in this conflict, in many others, but perhaps in this one more than in others. And it's important for us to explain over and again the fact that for us, neutrality is not a moral position. Neutrality is not a moral position. It's a tool that helps us work and helps us get access to prisoners of war, to populations in difficult situations, difficult to reach, hard to reach areas. So this is a message we're passing on and over and again. I don't think we're the only organization that is under stress with regards to its modus operandi, but perhaps the ICRC in particular, because neutrality for us is so central to what we're doing.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on, Christian.
Maybe can I
go ahead?
Yes.
Please.
Can I maybe just add something? Yeah, just to add on what Ariane was saying, we also have to understand, in addition to this highly mediatized context here and the quick and the fast pace of how information is going around, we also have the emotional element here. Things are quite dramatic, or are very dramatic on many fronts. That flood disaster is just one additional element in people's distress. So we deal a lot with families, we deal a lot with individuals, and the pain is tangible, and that also creates pressure to authorities at all levels, and that sometimes comes across as very pushy, as very strong. But we are addressing this as much as we can in our way of dealing with this situation, and unfortunately, expectations not always match what we are able to deliver right away. But we continue working on that, and we have relationships at many levels, and we consolidate that, and we'll move on these lines.
All right, Imogen, that's good for you, I hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Christian is from DPA, the German press agency.
Thank you, Jason. I was wondering whether you could elaborate a bit more on your negotiations to get access to the other side of the river. And do you have some figures? Do you know how many people are possibly affected or waiting for your help or the help of other humanitarians in each of those scenarios, upstream, downstream, and on the other side of the river? Thank you.
Jurg, that is a question probably for you. Yeah. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, well, at this point with figures, I think if you want figures, our media team can provide you with some detailed figures at a later stage, because again, I'm improvising here a bit and I don't have everything at my fingertips as such. Just to give you an idea, we are talking about tens of thousands of people downstream, as I mentioned before. So it goes up to 50,000, divided probably a bit more people on the other side affected on the left bank than on the right bank, roughly speaking. And then we talk about hundreds of thousands of people upstream affected in a different way. So that's just to give you the bigger picture. Now, the Red Cross is not present currently on the other side, but other entities are intervening and things are happening. We can't pronounce ourselves on that. We don't have precise information. We have stated our position on that, and I think that's where we have to leave it at this point. Back to you.
Good, thank you very much, Jurg. Ariane, I assume nothing to add on that point.
No, nothing to add, thanks.
Okay, we'll move on to Nina Larson, who's with AFP.
Yes, hi. Thanks for taking my question. I was wondering if you might have any numbers or if you've seen any casualties from the mines that have been displaced by the flooding. And then also I was wondering, the ICRC has announced a pretty dramatic budget cuts. I'm wondering if that has any impact at all on your operations in Ukraine. And finally, one other question, which was on the prisoner visits. If you have details on how many on each side, I heard a total number for both, but you can give some more details on that. Thank you.
Okay, let's take those one at a time. Let's start with the mine casualties. I suspect we may not have that kind of data. Jurg, is there any information on mine casualties due to the flooding?
No, that we don't have precise data on that. Actually, the number of casualties is not very high. This was again, this is a disaster that was, if you want, somehow in the making. We have raised attention to that issue already last year. We have actually sent interventions and pointed out the danger of the situation that it poses to the population, the civilian population, also in relation to international humanitarian law, that such critical infrastructures need to be protected and be treated with utmost care. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way, but in the sense that things were in place, and again, the number of casualties is quite small. It's more the affected people, the effects that they described before, that is a huge issue. Back to you.
Good, thank you, Jurg. And for the other two questions on prisoner visits and budget cuts, we'll ask Ariane to step in.
Yeah, thanks, Jason, and thanks for your question. Now, on the budget cuts, indeed, the ICRC is really going through a very difficult moment in time. We see needs arising everywhere, and unfortunately, our budgets being under big strain. Now, that being said, our response to the international armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine continues to be our largest operation of the ICRC and also in its whole history. Now, what we've been doing with regards to our budget in Ukraine specifically is to look very carefully at what expenditures can be reduced or streamlined. We're looking really to minimize the impact of the situation we're in institutionally with regards to our operation in Ukraine, and we want to make sure that whatever we do minimizes impacts to a minimum actually on the population that we're here to serve, Jurg and his teams. So it's extremely important now that as our the needs continue to evolve, that we continue also to engage with donors and we continue to try to get the most support we can from them. On your question on POW numbers and a more specific breakdown, that's unfortunately just as much as I can share with regards to the people that we have been being able to visit so far.
Okay, thank you, Ariane. Are you okay, Nina? Any follow-ups on that? No. Then I'm going to read out a question from FA, the Spanish news agency. How is it going? How is the ICRC engagement with Ukrainian authorities going in the flooded area? Obviously, one for you, Jurg. Are you able to work with them and assist them? I ask this because I believe President Zelensky has made some criticism recently towards your organization concerning lack of activity in the disaster zone. So there's a little bit of a repetition from something you've already addressed, but also the idea of what is your engagement like with Ukrainian authorities in the flood zone?
Yeah, actually, I just come out of a meeting with the emergency service here in Kherson. So things are still kind of very active, very quick, and demands are very high. But we have constructive discussions. We are engaging in those coordination efforts, and we are part of that overall response, yeah, which over time now becomes more visible. Again, as I said before, in the initial phase, it was more the Ukrainian Red Cross visibly present with their volunteers on the ground. That was sometimes seen as ICRC, where are you? And things evolve now, and we have different roles, and we play as movement partners. And actually, we are also here now with partner national societies from Europe. They show interest and have resources ready to come and deploy now and help in this response, not only as ICRC, URCS, but also the wider Red Cross movement that will be involved here. And again, we do have good relationship with authorities here, and they are not just fresh from today or last week. We have been working with these authorities, with the governors and their teams, with our presence here in the region. We have a sub-delegation in Odessa. We come here regularly. And again, not only the last week, but we have been here since February 2022, and even before that. So yes, our relationship here with the local authorities are good, or even very good.
Thank you, Jurg. We'll move next to Patrick Wintour. He's with The Guardian. Patrick, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Could I ask you what reasons do the Russians give to you for not providing you access? And secondly, doesn't this show that your attempts to be neutral have failed, that the Russians don't perceive you as such? Finally, this is a long-running dispute you've had with the Ukrainian government. This episode, the criticisms that are coming out now, have been running for quite a while. Has there been some kind of breakdown in communication between yourselves and the Ukrainians about your mandate and your purpose? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patrick. Those are detailed questions. Let's take them one at a time. The first question was about POWs, and we can go to Ariane for that.
No, thanks for your question, Patrick. Look, I think quite on the contrary, in the currently so polarized environment, the fact that we can visit POWs, the fact that we can exchange information with families, give news to them, we continue to receive lists also from both parties to the conflict on a regular basis, is for me rather the proof that neutrality has a role to play, is important, and we're probably one of the only organizations in a position today to do that. Now, neutrality is under strain because it's such a polarized environment. We have a very specific mandate, and as I said in my statement, we have to continue to stick to our principles in order to be able to work.
Ariane, in that answer, you referenced that we received lists. That might not be clear for everyone on the call. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Okay, so both parties to the conflict in the first weeks of the conflict established what is called a National Information Bureau, which is an entity existing on both sides. We are a neutral intermediary between the two, collecting information that they hand over to us with regards to people that are either under their authority, so prisoners of war, civilian detainees, or also people who have gone missing. And this is information that we work on and with on a daily basis in order to, on the one hand side, engage with the parties, but also be able to provide information to families.
The second question, Patrick, was, I think that you said that a lack of access indicates that our neutrality is not working, or that the Russian government doesn't see us as such. If that's a good summary of your question, Ariane, if you could address that.
Yeah. Look, access is always a very difficult negotiation. And I think in particular in those territories where security is extremely volatile, it is a particularly complex discussion, and physical access is indeed simply very complicated. So, there again, I think we're able to have those conversations to get feedback. I cannot dive more into details here. Of course, you will understand. But I can assure you that those discussions are taking place and are extremely important for us.
And of course, as you said, Ariane, the issue of it's not that we do not have access in Russia. As Ariane has already said, we do have access in Russia to prisoners of war. So look, we are on the ground in all areas affected by the conflict. We have offices. Jurg is on the ground with colleagues from Odessa, in Dnipro, in Poltava, reaching out to the people in the Ukrainian-controlled parts. And we have offices in Donetsk and Luhansk, where we work for people affected by the conflict on the other side of the front line. And we also have activities in Russia proper, where we engage for the benefit of people who fled the conflict in Ukraine. And Patrick, if I'm summarizing your questions correctly, the last point was a breakdown in communication, and I think that was with the Russian government. If Ariane, you want to address that?
I think that was meant on the Ukrainian side. No.
Oh, was it?
With regards to the criticism.
Is that right, Patrick?
Yes, I meant more that there's a long-running disagreement or dispute between yourselves and the Ukrainian government, not the Russian government. I mean, that's just my perception, but tell me if I'm wrong.
I think the important point here is that we're able to continue to work on the ground, and the fact that Jurg is engaging with all the local entities on the ground is a proof thereof. What is important for us is that we continue to engage for the people in need. We see those huge needs now after those devastating floods. We know that many other people in other parts of the front line need our aid, and this is where we continue to work on a daily basis to obtain access, to be safe, for volunteers of the Ukrainian Red Cross to be safe. And for that, we simply need a protected space to negotiate. And this is what we're seeking for. Now, I think in other questions we mentioned what is politicization, what is mediatization, but I think what is important for us is to preserve the space to be able to negotiate, to be able to operate, to be able to be effective, to bring aid to the people who have been so much affected over the last months by this conflict.
Thanks, Ariane. We're going to just take one or two more questions. There is somebody who is called iPhone who has had their hand raised for a while. iPhone, if you could come in and identify yourself and ask your question.
Is that me?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, my name is Ivo Mainzen. I'm from Neue Zürcher Zeitung in Switzerland. Sorry about that. So I had a question about the POWs as well. Of course, the ICRC has been accused of sort of doing this like false balance of, not giving, of staying in touch with both parties, of course, and being neutral. But at the same time, the conditions seem to be quite different in Ukrainian camps and in Russian camps, at least if one is to believe the reports of the High Commissioner of the UN, for example. So is there something you could say about the differences in conditions between Russian camps and Ukrainian camps? And I mean, the Ukrainian camps are openly accessible also to media. We have been there last week. In Russia, this access is not possible. So are you willing to elaborate on any kind of differences between the Russian and the Ukrainian side at all?
I will not be able to elaborate on the conditions of detention. This is really something that is part of our essential modalities with regards to our detention work, meaning that what we do, what we observe in places of detention is really shared confidentially and bilaterally with the respective authorities. The reason why we do that is that we want repeated access, we want things to be seen to improve, and we're therefore, we need, again, that space to be able to engage in a trustful environment in order to really have real change be observed. Now, what I can perhaps say is something that we ourselves saw also in the media of POWs returning was that once the ICRC had visited them and had engaged with authorities, they saw the conditions of detention significantly improve. I think that's a very important factor, and that's perhaps as much as I can share here.
Okay, thank you. And we're just going to take one last question, and I'm not even sure that Jurg is the right person to respond to this. Jurg, the question is, how dangerous is the situation with mines and the risk of explosions? How dangerous is the risk that it could interfere with work? What operations are planned in terms of mine clearance? And we can link this person up with Eric Tollefson if you don't have a ready answer on this, but maybe just generally where you are now and around Kherson, what's your assessment of the danger of mines?
Yeah, I think that danger is real. The danger is not so much for us as the humanitarians and our teams around, because we have a rough idea where those minefields are, and there are red zones where we can't go. We are not sending our teams. The problem and the danger is much more for the civilian population, and this change of patterns now with those floods. We have been working with entities and authorities on awareness raising. We also have provided material support to mark those minefields and to prevent from worse to happen. So that is more that dimension, and is affecting, luckily, less the humanitarian workers as such. Our danger is more what I said before on the shelling of an active front line. Back to you, Jason.
Okay, thank you, Jurg. Thanks, Jurg, and thanks, Ariane. We're going to wrap up this press briefing now, seeing no other questions. And anyway, we had scheduled this for 30 minutes. So thanks very much to all the media for your attention, and thanks to our two leaders for joining with us today. If you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or to the media team.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, goodbye.
Bye.
Recording stopped.